welcome to another edition of Real Talk, Real Stories. My name is Advita Patel, and I am one of the co-founders of the Asian Comms Network. And today's guest I'm very excited about because not only is he a huge supporter of the Asian Comms Network, but he was also the very first member of the Asian Comms Network as well, which he joined as soon as we made our link live. So welcome, Hasan. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Advita. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm really well. If you're watching us on live, then please do say hello and tell us where you're tuning in from. And then if you've got any questions, let us know as well. And if you're joining us on replay, then feel free to pop your questions in the comments as well, and we'll make sure we get back to you. But Hasan, for those folks who don't know who you are, would you mind doing a short introduction?
Sure. Thank you. Well, firstly, it's a pleasure for being on the ACN network call today. I watch each one every week, so being on the other side is very interesting for me. Anyway, I'm a comms consultant, so I work for an organization called a Balanced Economy Project, which looks at big tech, corporate power, and monopolies, and looking at ways to try and ensure that there's a fair economy for all. I've kind of had a very varied career, mainly in journalism and comms. I started as a BBC trainee about 20 odd years ago, worked at the BBC for a while. Then I moved to Doha and worked at Al Jazeera for 9 years, occupying various roles as a journalist, as a comms specialist, and also as a digital head of planning. And then I moved back to the UK, and I've worked at various universities and a couple of NGOs doing comms consultancy. And beyond my work, I like to run, read, and support Man United for my sins.
For your sins, definitely. I mean, I live in Manchester, and one of the first questions I always get asked is United or City, and I do have to think carefully before I respond, Hasan. So I get your pain. You've got a really interesting career. So you started off in journalism, and then you have now transitioned, I would say, into more corporate communications and in-house roles, supporting as a consultant and freelancer. When you started off as a BBC trainee 20 odd years ago, what was your inspiration to get into journalism?
So I think my inspiration to get into journalism is something that actually stemmed from my childhood. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, I think he did it to keep me quiet. I was a bit of a handful, so he'd give me £1 on a Saturday, and he'd say, go to the shop and get the Times and the Daily Mirror. And I don't want to sound old, but the Times was 50p, the Daily Mirror was 25p, and I would get 25p to buy a bar of chocolate. So that was the kind of the motivation. But then when I'd bring the newspapers back, he'd give me the Times, and he'd say to me, read the front page, read the stories, and tell me what the stories are, because his English wasn't the best. So I had to read the stories, the front page of the Times, and then translate it in Gujarati and tell him. So it meant I got a bit of an understanding in media. And I think because of that, I just got involved, and I used to watch news with him, and just generally had this interest for current affairs. And then that kind of morphed into, well, I want to do this for a job. So I was fortunate that I had the opportunity of applying for the BBC trainee program in 2005 and getting that opportunity. So it was something that I think was done to kind of keep me quiet, but that created an interest in journalism and current affairs in that way.
Amazing. And what did we've spoken with other guests about family and how they reacted to moving into a profession that they may not 100% understand. What was your reaction from your community when you said that you were going into journalism?
Within my family, there was a sense of pride. I think because generally, like my father, my grandfather, I think they grew up on the BBC. When they were in India, BBC World Service, and it was like kind of like, well, that perception that, when the BBC says something, it must be honest, it must be authoritative. So I think that in itself was a very inspirational moment for me. But I mean, getting into the BBC to a certain degree, then kind of, I would say, opened my eyes to kind of the inequalities that we were facing in the world as well. both from a personal perspective, but also from a community perspective. But within the family, it was always this, oh, he's working for the BBC. I'd always get the question, oh, when are you going to present Newsnight? Or when are you going to, be the number 10 Downing Street reporter? I think they all thought that journalism was all about the person in front of the camera. And I actually enjoyed doing the backroom stuff, the planning, the organizing, the actual producing of content. And I think that's what I got a bit of an interest in, actually then looking at stories and storytelling and narratives as well.
Amazing. So then what motivated you then to move to Doha? Like, what was your motivation to go there and support the biggest network in the Middle East?
So I think, I was fortunate to work for the BBC, but Advita, the ACN is an organization that, challenges power, but at the same time empowers people. And I think it's fair to be frank and honest. I didn't have the best experience at the BBC. There were subtle forms of racism. I remember one time, myself and two other Asian men, and one was a prominent national journalist. I don't want to mention, but we were just having lunch, and someone came over and said, "Oh, so what are you all conspiring about? An Asian takeover?" These were the kind of subtle forms of racism that I would get. I remember once I was actually told, "Oh, you won't make a good journalist because of your accent and because of your background." I was actually told that. Young and naive at the time. And then Al Jazeera, in some ways, was a kind of an inspirational entity which told a human story, told a story from a global South perspective. And when the opportunity came, I just basically packed my bags and lived in a hotel for 6 months in Doha. And I initially was supposed to only go there for 6 months and ended up staying there for 9 years. But I think the difference between Al Jazeera was that it was an international newsroom. People from New Zealand, South Africa, India. There was someone from Zimbabwe, for example, Colombia. So that whole varied kind of international outlook allowed me to broaden my horizons, but also kind of understand journalism and communications as well, actually, because that was my first job as a comms person at Al Jazeera when I was there 2 years in, to kind of get a feel of different voices, the global majority or the global South, as it was known. And it was interesting living in the desert for 9 years as well, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Gosh, that it's so interesting, isn't it, about these kind of, I call them actually, I no longer call them subtle racist behaviors, it's macroaggression. And the tone and the behavior and how people react to seeing someone different to them in an organization is quite fascinating for me in terms of why they make certain assumptions and stereotypes. And we started our career around the same year, and it's really interesting how we just allowed certain behaviors to pass by almost, because it was just accepted, I suppose, in those days that you just were different and you were told you were different, as you have experienced, because of where you lived or your accent or your behavior, which I think led to a lot of Asian and underrepresented comms folks to code switch and to mask a lot of their identity so they can fit into a mold, which I think is the challenge, that we faced in terms of our career progression, because we never really truly were allowed to live our life as authentically or as genuinely as we wanted to. So it's quite obvious, just based on that short story you shared, Hasan, that you probably did face some code switching in the BBC initially. And then I suppose moving over to Al Jazeera was very different in terms of acceptance, I'm assuming, based on the range of people you worked with, right?
The range of people. And I remember one incident at the BBC, I was working in a room and I was basically with 4 other people and they all had something in common. They were all University of Cambridge graduates and they all wrote for the Varsity newspaper, which was their in-house student newspaper. There was someone there who, I don't think they had a liking for me, and they kind of in a direct way said, "Oh, Hasan, did you write for the Varsity?" And I said, "No, I didn't go to Cambridge." "Oh, okay." And I thought, what's going on here is that this is kind of arrogance coming out. Like, you're not elite. You're not Oxford. You didn't write for the Varsity. Then I don't know what happened that day. I just ended up saying, "Oh, I'm really honored today." And they go, "Why?" I said, if someone told my granddad in 1953 as he got off Tilbury, the plank onto the British shores, "Ahmed, in 45 years' time, your grandson's going to work for Radio 4, BBC. He probably would have thought, what is this person smoking? What's he been drinking? So in 45 years, a grandson of a migrant is in a room full of, Cambridge educated folks. I'm honored. And I did that, I think, to kind of, it was a defense mechanism. But I was proud of that, because I thought, no, actually, no. I've earned it here. I've worked hard. My father's worked hard. My mother's worked hard. My grandparents worked hard for us to get to this stage. So no, I'm not gonna be belittled by your kind of class arrogance. I'm gonna stand up, and it was a bit liberating. And after that day, I thought, no, you know what? Even though I might be in a minority, I'm going to ensure that I will always stand up for my values. But more importantly, empower and defend others that come after me, because ultimately people did the same for me as well, as I was kind of embarking my career.
Yeah, good on you. Like, so good for you for doing that, because I think sometimes you get so there's a mix of being shocked at the behaviors that you're facing, that you almost are stunted in silence. You don't know how to react. You don't know what to say. And there's this whole kind of, when you're working for big, quite, well-known organizations that are respected. And like you said, your parents and your grandparents were proud that you had this establishment on your CV. You almost fear in some aspects of saying something against the norm that's been happening. And the fact that you have stood up and spoken up and said, actually, I'm really proud of how far I've got and where I'm actually here alongside all of you guys doing the same work as what you're doing, but and how hard I've worked to get here, with no influence from outside in terms of getting you that opportunity. There's no, I share my story about similar probably to yours, where parents didn't have any, connections in the media and journalism and communication. So whatever path we carved out, we have to carve out ourselves, right? And we hear that a lot in the Asian comms network itself, where most of those journalists and comms people who worked for big establishments have had to do it all on their own, 100% on their own merit, in a community that doesn't often understand the profession itself and the challenges that we often face as communication professionals. So that's, to be able to be bold and brave and stand up to very dominant voices is something that I think we can all take away and realize, actually, where is our privilege as underrepresented people to be able to make sure that the path is clear or clearer for those who are following behind us. So I think that's, great work on your part, Hasan. I know at the time I can imagine it being quite challenging and difficult to stand up to behavior that way, but I'm pretty certain that those folks who are listening who have faced adversity like that relate to what you're sharing and saying. And it's, it's tough. I can imagine how tough it was at the time.
It was, and I think another thing is about allies and finding allies, whether from the community or beyond. And there were some good friends and good people who became good friends and was very supportive. But it was a very different world, the BBC at that time. I'm not sure what it is like now, but Al Jazeera was a completely different world as well, in the sense of, it didn't really matter where your background was from, because ultimately you were in a melting pot of different cultures and different arguments. The interesting thing about Al Jazeera was there was always a bit of a debate about people who were born speaking English or those who had English as a second language. And that kind of created a bit of a schism. There was a bit of a superiority complex kicking in, but there were a lot of people from throughout the world who just, I think, were more confident. And also it gave me a bit of an understanding on like the perception of this outside the UK. And I've made friends that I've been friends with now for 10, 15 years because of that.
I mean, that's, you just spoke about there about, because I was going to ask you about some of your kind of toughest moments in your career and how did you get through those tough moments, because it's not easy, as you said. And then, culturally things have changed. I know things feel like, especially now, things are going a bit backwards, or, people are reverting back to poor behavior based on everything that we're seeing in the world. And I know we've spoken offline about some challenges that we've seen within the public relations community and industry itself on allyship and supporting and, being silenced, I suppose, when we are talking about uncomfortable subjects, because other people are uncomfortable on our behalf or on other people's behalf. So on those kind of tough moments, you mentioned there about friends and having that community, but what advice would you give to those who are just feeling a bit lost and maybe are still facing some of the challenges that you faced in your career, where there are some passive aggressive macro aggressions and subtle kind of digs about them being there? Like, how would you advise that person in terms of moving past that? How would they get through those kind of behaviors that are, that are potentially, feels like it's just someone asking a very curious question, but we know it's peppered in lots of different types of biases. What are your thoughts on that?
I think firstly, it's you can only can control what you can control,
Mm,
and something I always believe is, so there may be external forces and you can't change everything, but you can only take incremental steps to try and create a safe space for yourself. Go out and find those allies. There are people who are sympathetic, but don't kind of then think that they'll fight the battle for you. You've got to do it yourself. But that support mechanism is always essential within
mm,
an organization, but also externally. I had a good family support network, my siblings, my friends, and beyond. So I'd speak to them. But I think it's about just trying to be confident that you've got nothing to lose, you've got nothing to prove to anybody, and working within the means and putting your point across, or kind of calling things out. I mean, I had an experience at the BBC where I genuinely felt that the management in one particular entity weren't dealing with a situation for somebody, and probably it's just my kind of, I don't know, nature. I ended up sending an email to the controller of Radio 4 with that complaint
mm,
on behalf of somebody, and with all credit, he actioned it, and action was taken. So I think that probably not everybody could do that or wants to do that, but I think when you go out there and hear those stories, that empowers people. And I remember I heard of someone doing something similar, and I thought, well, if he could do it, I could do it as well. And I think
mm,
it's trying to connect and link where possible the good things that you can learn from an organization, and try and develop yourself. And of course, sometimes it is difficult, and there were
mm,
times where I kind of think, I can't be dealing with this. But now looking back with the hindsight, I think taking those small measures allowed me to kind of escape to a certain degree, but more importantly, develop my own career as I moved on. And
mm,
I've always fundamentally believed that if someone contacts me with a similar problem, I will try and help them. Because I think the fundamental thing is that when you're on the other side, when you create a chain, then more people will benefit. Don't be selfish. Don't just think, oh, I had a problem and then I don't want to help anyone else. No,
mm.
experience can get you a long way forward, and other people can benefit and gain from that as well.
Yeah. Sound advice. This whole pay it forward, speak up where you have the privilege to speak up, and support those who may not have the support around them is really good advice and guidance. And that's one of the key reasons that Fazana, Shirani, and I really wanted to set up the Asian Comms Network, because you do feel isolated and you can feel alone. And if you don't have the privilege of having a great family unit around you, or a network of friends or colleagues who you can lean on and talk with, working in PR and communications and journalism is hard as somebody who is different from the dominant culture. And as much as you may have as much resilience within you, and you kind of like bat off some side comments, you do need to understand and recognize where your support is needed, and who are those people to give you that support. And as you made a really great point there, it's also understanding and recognizing that sometimes not every ally is in the position to fight for you or to support you. So how are you going to navigate the circumstances that you're facing in a way that protects your mental health and physical health, that doesn't cause you any issues as you're kind of growing and developing in your career? And I think a lot of folks in the Asian Comms Network itself have spoken up about finding that community, finding that network, controlling what they can control, and making a difference where they can. And that's the advice that I often share with others who just feel a bit lost. And we, like I mentioned just before, that we have spoken offline recently about certain things that have been happening in our industry, where there has been a lot of silence from people who we would expect to support or speak up on our behalf, or at least, mention it. And there was discussions taking place on various WhatsApp groups, as both of us were members of and stuff. And it's was, I suppose, from what you're sharing about allyship and support, like how do we, those of us who do potentially have the privilege to speak up on behalf of our communities, how do we or can we encourage allies or supporters or so-called allies to participate in these conversations that are taking place? Because I think that's some of the feedback and conversations I have with others, where the silence is truly deafening. With everything that's happening around them, nobody's really saying anything or checking in or making sure that is there anything that they need. What advice, you've done this, as you said, Hasan, for 20 years, right? You've been in this industry for 20 years, worked at various different organizations and been an active ally yourself for our community. What advice or support do you have for allies who may be listening, in terms of what they can do to support not only our community, but also other underrepresented communities who right now may be feeling isolated or feel lost in terms of who they are and what they're doing? So we've spoken about what we can do, but what do you think allies can do?
I think you've got to look for authenticity and sincerity. And I've learned now that those two valuable skills people may have or may not have. And those who have that authenticity, like, you know what, I'm supportive of you, or I'm concerned of what's going on, hence why I'm reaching out to you. That's an ally. And their sincerity in what they're saying and what they're doing is the proof in the pudding.
Mm.
Don't go chasing those who aren't going to get involved or not going, because that's self-depreciating. It's not good for the soul or the mind, because that rejection doesn't help. So even if you've got 2 out of 100 who are your allies, work with them.
Mm.
Build that network. I remember I worked at one university, and I'm in touch with the comms team there, probably more than any other organization, and I was the only non-white person in that team. But they still keep in touch with me, and over the past few weeks, with what's going on with the far right, etc., etc., I've had messages of support saying, "Hasan, I hope you well. Just remember, we're here if you need to talk or whatever." But I then also ensured that I was their ally as well.
Yeah.
And there are people within that group of colleagues who were from other minority groups in whatever capacity it may be, in terms of faith, identity, gender, sexuality, to kind of be their ally, because it's a two-way process.
Yeah.
And something that I learned recently, and you've spoken about these conversations, is that I was extending my kind of allyship to some people about when they were kind of facing difficulty, but it wasn't coming back. So I then felt this cause that they're doing is insincere, because ultimately allyship is about building a coalition against something that may be a problem against for all of us. And for that, you have to kind of dabble in and give support, but at the same time receive support as well. So I think that's the key thing for me. It's about I know straight away. I'd figured it out very quickly. Is this an authentic and a sincere kind of conversation, or is it just something to tick the diversity box?
Yeah. Yeah, wise words. 100%. It's that you always have to kind of look out for that authenticity and curiosity, and people who are genuinely interested in the community and are giving, as well as learning. Right, that's really important. We always say that you don't have to be perfect, and you will make mistakes, but it's about how you're learning and supporting. And I love your stance on that two-way street as well. We can be allies for other marginalized and minority communities as well, and what can we do to support and use our privilege, because we all have privilege, all of us, with different types of privileges. So how are we using our benefit to make sure other communities or other people within our community are supported as well? So you spoke about your grandfather being one of your kind of inspirations, but has there been anyone in your career within our industry that's been, someone that you've looked at and gone, yeah, they're an inspiration, they're a leader I can kind of look up to? Are there anyone that's kind of helped you in your career journey over your couple of decades that you've been working in PR and comms?
I've had a lot of individuals come throughout my career who I feel have been an inspiration to me, and so kind of guided me in some ways. one particular person was the guy who gave me my first comms gig. So I was working in the newsroom, Al Jazeera, and suddenly, his name's Usama Saeed. Bit of a plug for him. He's the executive director now at the University of Manchester in terms of comms. And he just said, look, I need someone to be part of the comms team because I can't get through to the newsroom. The journalists are a very weird bunch, and I think they'll only listen to someone who's kind of worked in the newsroom. So I kind of said, oh, you want me to be your Rottweiler? And he went, yeah. And he guided me and he supported me, and he kind of gave me the room to kind of move and develop myself from a newsroom journalist to a comms professional. But also at the same time, there was an Australian Alison Carmody. She's an Australian comms professional, and she joined Al Jazeera as well. And the three of us kind of got a very strong kind of relationship and bond. And Usama was kind of our mentor, but Alison and myself kind of we helped each other, we worked with each other, and we kind of developed each other. And now she's head of comms at a leading university in Saudi Arabia. Usama's at the University of Manchester. I'm doing my own stuff, but we're still 10 years on, have that connection. And I think that why I'm kind of speaking fondly of these two people is the fact that they kind of went out their way to help me and build the team. And we made mistakes, but the best thing was we were kind of thrown at the deep end, because within like 4 months of starting the comms team at Al Jazeera, 4 journalists were arrested in Egypt, Al Jazeera journalists. And we ended up having to lead an international campaign for press freedom, hence why I've got a lot of interest in press freedom and journalism as a whole. And the campaign resulted in political work, in lobbying, in creating creative ways of, like, for example, trying to keep the plight of these journalists who were arrested in Egypt on the international scene. And when the US President Barack Obama kind of refers to your campaign in a press conference, you kind of made it. So,
Yeah.
so
Definitely.
So from a US president's press conference to a journalist in Somalia land campaigning with the hashtag Free AJ Staff, the guys were released. But I think what really made the difference was the fact that we gelled as a team and supported each other, and that's something I'll never forget.
Love that. Love that. Colleagues can really make or break your time in an organization. That's fantastic. The final question to you, Hasan: if you could shape the future of journalism, public relations, comms, whichever one you prefer to kind of talk about, for the next generation, what would you want it to look like? Like, what does that good look like for you?
I think everybody always wants to have an industry which reflects the communities that they serve. And it's good to see, for example, the ACN being developed. And I have to say, what you, Shola and Fazana, have done is immense. It's brought a family, or it's created a family, if you know what I mean. And that support's made a huge difference. But moving forward, it's about trying to get people from those backgrounds who may not be in that industry. And we know there's a disconnect there in terms of the number of Asian people in comms and PR and journalism, but also from working class, from community backgrounds with lived experiences as well. And I think that's our challenge, that we need to not only get people and inspire them to try and, who may look like us, but at the same time have the experiences of life. Because I feel that I'm worried about our kind of industry just going down this, oh yeah, we've got people of diversity. Yeah, but what's their experience? What's their life experience? And I'm not saying that everyone has to come from a coal mining town in North England with like strong working class traditional roots, but a diverse opinion. Not everything has to be London centric. Not everything has to be from a kind of a suburban middle class perspective, but people from all walks of that background, because I think that's the key thing. And I think the second thing that is that, kind of being proud of one's heritage and one's kind of contribution, because as Advita, you're in many conferences and many seminars and many meetings, you're bringing your perspective, not just as a comms professional who's done really well, but someone who's from Manchester, who's got those stories of what it was like getting to where you are. And I think that's what we're lacking. There's too many boring stories sometimes in certain boardrooms, and I think we need to change that.
I know. Oh, I love that. Yeah, you're so spot on with, that cognitive diversity as well as representative diversity in rooms, because that's what brings storytelling alive, right? To your point, like, we want to hear different perspectives and different lived experiences and different ways of looking at things. And we don't need to, preach to the converted here, but there's a reason why this is so important, because it has seen great benefit for various different campaigns and organizations. And we've seen, both of us have witnessed campaigns and messages that have gone wrong because they haven't had the right people in the room being able to have those conversations, or cognitive, different cognitive diversity as well as that representative diversity. And that's, I will always talk about that.
Just on that point, do you think that like yourself and others, or even myself, we are more self-aware on that, even if it's about another community or another perspective? And is that because we are constantly on guard because we know what the problems may be, or is it because we've been channeled to think like that? And that kind of begs the question that why is that not the case across the board? Surely people, when they're working, should think, beyond just their kind of blinkered visions.
It's that, such a good question. It's to do with familiarity, right? So when you have never felt excluded or isolated or felt different, you don't know. It's what you don't know, right? And I think we've grown up in a community where we have been different. We have been a marginalized, community. So we're acutely aware of the difference around us. We're acutely aware, being the only Asian or brown face in a room. We're acutely aware of the accents that we might have, from the accents we have at home to the accents we may display outside. So all of this kind of builds this understanding of what exclusion actually does mean for people who are different. So we're more empathetic to folks who are different to the dominant culture in that room, wherever we are in the world, right? And whatever we're doing, we're always, I always feel that people who have been marginalized or been excluded in their careers generally, it doesn't apply across the board, but generally are more open for bringing more difference to that conversation and opening up the doors much wider. I mean, just before we switch off this conversation, when we three of us set up the Asian Comms Network, and I messaged a load of senior figures of Asian, backgrounds to support the ACN, and I naively assume that we'd have a huge foray of individuals who really wanted to kind of get the support behind what we were doing because of some of the adversity they may have faced. But surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly for some folks who are listening, there was some resistance, and I did receive a few DMs from pretty senior figures who said, it's not, it's not word for word, but I'm kind of summarizing, like, I've made it on my own. And I didn't get here with any help. So, everyone else should just kind of crack on, really, and let's not make a big deal about it. It's what they were kind of, saying it, maybe not in that as bluntly as that, but implied it and stepped away from the support. So we've all, we've got challenges within our own community as well, right? In terms of empathy and support, and how are we helping each other along as well? Because there are definitely some people out there who have been conditioned, I would like to think, to believe that they can't acknowledge or appreciate the support they may have had around them to get to where they are today. And I think that's because they have probably faced so much adversity that they're kind of blocked out some of those challenges. So folks who are listening on this either live or on replay, I think it's always important for us to reflect and remember our contribution as well, and how are we kind of giving back and supporting where we can, but also kind of just being aware that not everybody has had, just because we're all, from South Asian, East Asian backgrounds, we may not have all had this similar experiences or want to support something like this. So what is that blocker or barrier that might be stopping people saying, yes, let's give it a go? So it's just such a, human beings are complex creatures, aren't they, Hasan? We are really, what we think is simplistic or why can't they think in that way is often so much more complex than we may give ourselves or them, credit for at times. But
Definitely.
all we can do, as you've said, is hold people account, speak up where we feel safe to do so, and challenge, poor behavior where we can, based on.
And also tell your stories. Some of the
Yeah.
work that I've seen people do, I just think, wow, share that, tell others, because that inspires others as well.
Yeah.
And there's so many individuals who've done some great campaigns in comms or PR, and done some great journalism as well. And I think it's kind of essential we amplify those voices, but also celebrate the success stories as well, because boy, there's some great work taking place.
Amazing.
We've seen you all the time.
Yeah, remarkable work, and what fantastic words to end on. Show up for yourself, share your stories, and be proud, just like you have been with everything that you've achieved. And don't let anyone drag you down or dim your, shine, as I often say. Well, thank you so much, Hasan. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Hasan Salim Patel. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so yeah, drop me a line, and more than happy to have a coffee or a chat.
Amazing. Well, please do get in touch with Hasan as well. This has been an incredible conversation. Really appreciate your support, Hasan, that you're giving to the ACN. It takes people like you to help us kind of build a community. So we're really grateful for all your contributions and support. And thank you for joining me on this live stream today. I will be back next week as well with another wonderful guest. So please do tune in. It's every Wednesday at midday UK time. But you can also watch on replay on Instagram, YouTube, and of course, LinkedIn as well. And we'll see you next time. Take care. Thank you for tuning in.